Prime Minister, thank you very much for joining us. It's difficult at times like this to sort of stop and pause and reflect on just how big this event is. As you prepare to go to this funeral, how are you feeling?
To be honest, there's been a number of moments where I feel extremely humbled by what I've observed, and in part that's just been because being around the British people and the amount of effort that individuals are putting into coming and paying their respects, lining up for hours through the night. When I visited the King, there was a group standing outside Buckingham Palace, and our car was holding for a time, and one member of the public said to me, I've stood here for 5 hours, and it was simply for a moment to just acknowledge the family as they drove past. To be amongst people who are motivated in that way, it's a very humbling thing, and to represent New Zealand even more so.
World leaders, you'll be meeting them, 500 or so, or 1,000 at the Palace. How will you approach that? Is that an opportunity to make some connections, or is it just actually an event in itself and you just go with the flow?
I go with the flow. I think actually in these moments they're not too dissimilar to what anyone would have experienced at a large event. Even such as a wake or a funeral. You do take that moment to reflect with the people that you know, but you do take the opportunity to reconnect as well. And as anyone would do, you make a bit of a beeline for the people that you know and you haven't seen for a while, and I imagine there'll be a lot of that taking place, given most will not have seen each other for at least 2 to 3 years.
The group of New Zealanders, they've met and they've all got here now. How are they feeling, do you think, and how difficult was it to choose that grouping of New Zealanders?
Yeah, yes, you can imagine being asked to find 10 people that can reflect the connection between Her Majesty and New Zealand. That is a difficult task, but we were also asked to reflect New Zealanders and their connection with the UK, and so that's why we've panned across young people, sports, education, business, but very importantly Māoridom, and I hope people can see that reflected in who's here. But regardless of whether they're names that are known to you or not, I can tell you every single one is humbled to be here.
Without disrespecting the Queen, to talk a little bit about Charles, will the relationship between New Zealand and the UK be different with Charles as the King?
I think I think as an individual leader, everyone will bring their own focus or priorities to their role, and keeping in mind, of course, Charles will have in his mind, King Charles will have in his mind his leadership of the Commonwealth as well. But in terms of the relationship with New Zealand, he already has one, so it'll be about, I think, how he shifts that existing relationship into his new role.
Do you think that New Zealanders will see it that way? For most New Zealanders, they only know the Queen, and therefore their idea of the monarch is the Queen. Can Charles realistically recreate that?
Well, of course, he has spent his entire life preparing for this role. And I can't imagine what that must feel like. But you can see no doubt, I'm sure, in his actions as well. He has visited New Zealand as many times as Her Majesty has, or did. And so he has a knowledge and an affinity. He has a particular interest in matters that relate to our environment, but also our young people. So he will bring something different to the role, I have no doubt.
And he did mention King Tuhaitia.
He did.
And do you think he will take a more proactive or interested, not perhaps that the Queen wasn't, I don't want to disrespect the Queen, but a more proactive role in issues regarding the treaty, in issues regarding grievances of Maori that still exist with the Crown?
I can, of course, speak to the directional priorities in the relationship that the King himself may have, but I've certainly seen an interest and a knowledge of Indigenous issues generally, and the fact that, of course, he's knows Kingi Tuhaitia, I think, is an acknowledgement of an awareness of the importance of the relationship between the Crown and Māoridom.
What would you say to Maori in New Zealand who have been restrained in their criticism of the Crown in respect to the Queen but have mixed feelings.
Yeah.
What would you say to them as you go into this funeral about this whole process, this whole unbelievable procedural process and ritual, and they maybe be feeling a bit mixed about that?
Yeah. And look, I think every nation and every people has its traditions and has its way of paying respect and saying goodbye. And I've sensed a general acknowledgement and respect for that. That certainly doesn't mean, I think, that we wouldn't have an expectation going forward, that there wouldn't be an ongoing conversation around New Zealand's relationship with the Crown. I do think it will be an evolution, but I think there's ways that will be undertaken respectfully as well.
Yeah, you were asked about that on British television, the BBC. So you're talking to millions of British people about. You acknowledged that you would like to see New Zealand potentially change its head of state in your lifetime, but that no urgency. I'm just wondering how you crafted that message, or how you thought about that. You probably knew it was coming, I'm sure.
Well, it's a question that I've been asked even before I became Prime Minister, and I've always had the same view. It hasn't changed. Perhaps one of my reflections would be that even being in this role, still believing that same thing, that it will happen in my lifetime, even if it's not something our government is choosing.
Why not? Why not?
It's not a conversation to enter lightly, and I do believe that there needs to be that public sense of the desire for it, the movement for it. I have been asked about a future republic only ever by the media. I can't recall a time a member of the public has asked me about it. Now, look, that is not to say, of course, there will be a sentiment amongst the public. There will be a view out there. But is it one that I sense urgency around now? No, not for us.
It's interesting, though, because watching King Charles, there has been an urgency this week for him to make a big effort to acknowledge the realm nations. So it seems clear, or it would appear, that he certainly wants to maintain that.
Well, I think obviously that is for the king to reflect, rather than ever for us to really give a sense of the direction that he anticipates realm countries going. But I think the priority is simply, first and foremost, he is our king, so I can, as you'd appreciate, there'd be a prioritisation of connecting with each who has that status. But I also think, and this is an observation, not a reflection of any comment or discussion, but my observation is that there's been an understanding about the evolution of our relationships. Nothing stands still. We've seen nations make their own choices, and you see an acceptance of that. So I think New Zealand will, as others have, evolve over time, but in a way that works for New Zealand. There are complexities for us.
And there's still a future for the Commonwealth regardless, right?
Absolutely. And value to it, I believe.
Just a couple of quick last questions. One on climate change, and I wonder with King Charles, would you welcome or encourage or look forward to him making climate change a far bigger issue? Now, I know he's got constitutional issues in terms of the British government, but he has been a champion for climate change.
He has, and interestingly, he's been a champion long before it was on the global agenda. I think actually that gives you a bit of an insight into him as a person, his interest in matters of science and just his engagement on issues that matter to him. But you're right, he has a number of considerations now. I think personally that having any leader's attention on one of the greatest challenges that we face is only helpful, but he'll be managing that within a new construct now than what he had before.
Just finally, the funeral itself, I heard somebody on the BBC, the same panel, the show that you were on, described, who said he had spoken to the Queen and she didn't want it to be boring. That's what she didn't want. How are you feeling about that service? It's an hour long, but it's going to be pretty surreal, isn't it?
I imagine, yes. I have no expectation of what it might be like, but I imagine a good chunk of my time will be spent just thinking about the privilege it is to be there in the first place on behalf of New Zealand, and just always wanting to make sure I do the job well on everyone's behalf.